In a scene depicting an episode of the widely watched game show To Tell the Truth, set in 1977, three contestants step forward, each vying to convince the panelists that they are the renowned Frank Abagnale Jr., portrayed by Leonardo DiCaprio. Abagnale's exploits include impersonating an airline pilot, a lawyer, and a doctor, along with orchestrating elaborate scams spanning 3 continents and amassing millions of dollars, all accomplished before he turned 19. The movie commences in 1969 as FBI agent Carl Hanratty Jr., portrayed by Tom Hanks, arrives at a French prison to rendezvous with the ailing Frank Abagnale Jr., who endeavors to flee the facility before being extradited to the USA to face charges for his string of offenses. The scene transitions back 6 years earlier, where we find 16-year-old Frank Abagnale Jr. residing in New Rochelle, New York, alongside his father, Frank Abagnale Sr., portrayed by Christopher Walken, and his French mother, Paula, played by Natalie Baye. Frank Sr. orchestrates a scheme to procure a suit for his son, Frank Jr., through deception, after which Frank Jr. aids his father by posing as a chauffeur in an attempt to secure a loan from Chase Manhattan Bank. However, their plans are foiled when the loan is declined due to a series of IRS tax frauds committed by Frank Sr. As a consequence, the family is compelled to relinquish their lavish residence for a modest apartment, leading to escalating tension within the household. Frank soon discovers that his mother is engaged in an extramarital relationship with Jack, played by James Brolin, a close friend of his father. Feeling alienated and uncertain about fitting into his new school environment, Frank adopts the guise of a substitute teacher in his French class for a brief period. As tensions escalate between Frank's parents, leading to their divorce proceedings, Frank is pressured to choose which parent to live with. Overwhelmed by the situation, Frank flees home, utilizing checks provided by his father. As his funds dwindle, he resorts to engaging in confidence tricks. Frank's schemes become increasingly audacious, culminating in his impersonation of an airline pilot. Through forging Pan Am payroll checks, he manages to embezzle over $2.8 million, indulging in luxurious hotel stays and fine dining, all at the expense of Pan Am. Soon after, Frank endeavors to utilize the stolen money to mend his fractured family ties. He orchestrates a lavish dinner at an upscale restaurant and presents his father with the keys to a brand new Cadillac. However, Frank Sr. declines the gift, citing ongoing scrutiny from the IRS, and attempts to maintain a positive atmosphere during the meal. Several months later, on Christmas Eve, while Carl toils away alone in his office, Frank reaches out to apologize for deceiving him during their earlier encounter at the hotel. Carl sternly reminds Frank that apologies don't erase his actions, and to Frank's dismay, Carl discerns the underlying reason for the call. Frank lacks anyone else to confide in. Frank abruptly ends the call, leaving Carl to press on with his investigation. Subsequently, Carl uncovers the truth behind the pseudonym Barry Allen, derived from the Flash comic books, and learns that Frank is actually a minor, which explains the absence of records on him. Recalling Frank's mention of the New York Yankees, Carl instructs his team to search for runaways in New York. Their efforts eventually lead them to Frank's mother, who has since remarried. Upon viewing Frank's yearbook photo, Carl finally identifies his elusive suspect. A year later, Frank undergoes a significant transformation, transitioning from impersonating an airline pilot to assuming the role of a doctor, complete with a meticulously forged Harvard Medical School degree in Georgia. During this time, he becomes romantically involved with Brenda Strong, played by Amy Adams, a charming Southern nurse employed at a hospital. Frank proposes marriage to Brenda, partly motivated by his desire to mend her fractured relationship with her parents, who had disowned her following an abortion. The couple embarks on a journey to Louisiana to meet Brenda's parents, where Frank not only reveals his Lutheran background, but also portrays himself as a qualified lawyer in addition to being a doctor. Subsequently, Frank impresses Brenda's father, portrayed by Martin Sheen, and secures a position as an assistant prosecutor after successfully passing the bar exam. Frank makes the heartfelt decision to marry Brenda and resolves to share the news with his father. However, during this conversation, Frank Sr., now employed as a U.S. postal worker, reveals to his son that Frank's mother has remarried, leaving Frank utterly devastated. Distraught by this revelation, Frank bids farewell to his father, severing ties for good. In a moment of vulnerability, he reaches out to Carl, expressing his desire to end the chase and settle down. Carl, however, grimly reminds Frank that this isn't feasible, given that Frank has absconded with a staggering $4 million. Following their conversation, Carl's team scours wedding announcements in a bid to track down Frank. When Carl finally catches up with Frank at their engagement party to arrest him, Frank decides to come clean to Brenda. He reveals the truth about his criminal activities, shows her all the stolen money, and asks her to flee with him. Despite her shock, Brenda accepts his offer and agrees to meet him at the airport 2 days later. However, when she arrives as planned, Frank witnesses a devastated Brenda being coached by FBI agents who have surrounded the airport. Realizing that Carl has persuaded her to betray him, Frank doesn't show up as expected. Carl, anticipating Frank's next move, has his men stake out the airport, confident that Frank will try to outwit him and escape by plane. Frank devises a new scheme, pretending to be a Pan Am recruiter, hiring stewardesses for European flights. He selects attractive women as eye candy to distract Carl's men, while he slips past them unnoticed. Using a decoy in the unloading zone of the airport to divert attention, Frank successfully makes his escape to Europe. A year and a half later, in 1967, Carl, frustrated and exasperated, informs his boss that Frank has escalated his criminal activities, now forging genuine checks across the Eastern Hemisphere. Despite Carl's plea to pursue Frank in Europe, his boss denies permission. Determined to capture Frank, Carl consults professional printers with one of Frank's counterfeit checks, who suggests that it could have originated from only a few European countries. Recalling an interview with Frank's mother, Paula, where she mentioned being born in France, Carl travels to her hometown of Montrichard. On Christmas Eve, he locates Frank inside a sprawling printing factory, confirming his suspicions. Carl warns Frank that the French police will apprehend him forcefully if he doesn't surrender quietly. Initially thinking Carl is jesting, Frank is stunned when Carl reassures him he's serious. Frank complies, handcuffing himself, and accompanies Carl outside, where there are initially no signs of law enforcement. Impressed by Carl's deception, Frank compliments him on his skillful subterfuge. However, their moment is short-lived as the French police swiftly arrive and escort Frank to prison. Carl promises to arrange Frank's extradition back to the USA. Fast forward to Christmas Eve 1969. During Frank's extradition flight to the United States, Carl delivers devastating news. Frank's father passed away in an accidental incident the previous year. Overwhelmed by grief, Frank executes an incredible escape from the plane and tracks down his mother's whereabouts. Upon arrival, he discovers his mother with her new husband and a young girl, Frank's half-sister. Before Frank can engage in conversation with his mother, a group of police officers arrive, prompting Frank to surrender. It remains unclear whether Frank's mother alerted the authorities or if it was mere coincidence that they arrived at her residence. After being tried and convicted, Frank receives a 12-year prison sentence for various charges, including check forgery and embezzlement. He is incarcerated in a maximum security federal prison in Atlanta. Over the next 4 years, Carl regularly visits Frank. During these visits, Frank demonstrates his keen observational skills by identifying a forger simply by glancing at a check shown to him by Carl. As their interactions continue, Frank assists Carl in identifying other check forgers. Impressed by Frank's abilities, Carl arranges for Frank to serve out the remainder of his sentence working for the FBI's check fraud department under Carl's supervision. Although Frank is released from prison, he finds himself chained to a desk job and yearning for the excitement of his former life. Despite attempting to pose as an airline pilot once again, Frank's plans are intercepted by Carl at the airport. However, rather than apprehend him, Carl allows Frank to go free, confident that Frank will return to work on Monday with no one chasing him. When Frank fails to appear at work on time, Carl grows anxious, fearing that Frank has absconded once more, jeopardizing both their lives. However, to Carl's relief, Frank eventually arrives and inquires about their next case. Annoyed, Carl demands to know how Frank cheated on the bar exam in Louisiana, to which Frank calmly responds that he didn't cheat. He genuinely passed the exam after studying for only 2 weeks. Astonished, Carl questions Frank's honesty, to which Frank merely smiles. Their partnership continues as they delve into their investigative work together. In the end, it's revealed through scrolling text that Frank has been happily married for 26 years, has 3 sons, resides in the Midwest with his family, remains close friends with Carl, and has become renowned for catching some of the world's most elusive money forgers. Additionally, Frank continues to receive millions of dollars annually for his work in creating checks that are virtually impossible to forge. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more film caps.